Open borders, deadly fentanyl, human smuggling, the drug crisis in America. But are the drug cartels really responsible for all this? Hi, my name's Steve Montero, former Secret Service agent, military veteran, author. Join me as we explore who really is to blame for the crisis at the border. Hi, I'm Steve Montero, and thanks for joining. On a recent campaign stop, I heard Governor Ron DeSantis discuss his plan to disrupt the cartels if he were to become president, including the use of the military to accomplish that goal. Now, I fully stand behind what Governor DeSantis has stated because I do believe that the cartels are, in fact, a national security threat to the United States, and I think we need to use every tool in our toolbox to disrupt their activities. But it's what Governor Ron DeSantis didn't say that concerns me the most, and I'll get back to that in just a second. But for a minute, let's go ahead and talk about the drug cartels themselves. Now, there are two major drug cartels in the Jalisco cartel and the Sinaloa cartel, and there are about 198 smaller armed gangs that basically do a lot of their bidding. Now, the cartels have been around for decades. We've seen them in different iterations, called by different names, led by different people, but they in fact are basically the same organizations that are just being reinvented. Now, they've been affecting Mexican politics for years through corruption and through bribery. They've affected elections within Mexico by putting in their candidates. They've assassinated politicians. They've assassinated prosecutors. They've bribed corrupted police officers and actually assassinated them as well. And they basically have just gotten rid of anybody who stands in their way because they are extremely powerful and influential within Mexico. And now we've seen them branch out from drugs into human smuggling as well, and I'll talk about that in a second. But it's estimated that the cartels bring in anywhere from $15 to $50 billion a year in revenue. That is a tremendous amount of money. And again, with that money, they buy protection and they buy influence. Now, just to show you how powerful these drug cartels are, there's a clip that I'm going to show you about a shootout between the Mexican government and the cartels themselves, because the Mexican government had the gall to arrest the son of El Chapo, who apparently is moving up the food chain to take his dad's place in the drug business. That didn't go over too well for the cartels, so they reacted. Take a look at this.
The firefight exploded on the streets in the city of Culiacan. Mexican military outgunned by a drug cartel with young families caught in the crossfire. Just before the bloodshed spilled into the streets, Mexican commandos stormed a home, cornering Ovidio Guzman Lopez, the son of notorious drug lord El Chapo. But the 28-year-old, one of the heirs of the feared Sinaloa cartel, would soon be released. As authorities took on a relentless counterattack resembling a war zone, cartel members in black masks fired machine guns onto the streets. People running for cover as vehicles erupted in flames, dozens of inmates escaping in the chaos, forcing Mexican security forces to retreat. Mexico's president says the capture of a criminal cannot be worth more than people's lives. This decision was made to protect citizens.
Now, that just goes to show you how powerful the drug cartels are indeed. They've actually threatened the Mexican government. Now, the president of Mexico, in response to this shootout, released the son of El Chapo. So that just is another piece of evidence that shows you how powerful these cartels really are. Now, when we discuss these cartels, there's a question that has to be posed, and that is, how did these cartels become so rich, so powerful, so deadly, so influential, and such a threat to the United States? Well, you need look no further than our own country, the United States of America. Because that $15 billion to $50 billion in revenue that I mentioned comes directly from the United States and flows into the coffers of the drug cartels. Yes, we, in fact, fund the drug cartels. Yes, we in fact created the drug cartels. Yes, we in fact continue to finance the drug cartels. Why? Because of America's large appetite for illicit drugs. We represent about 5% of the world's population, yet we consume about 25% of the world's illicit drugs. So there's the problem right there. Now, recently I saw an interview between a Mexican politician and an American reporter, where the reporter was discussing the issues with the cartels in Mexico and the corruption and so forth. And the Mexican politician, whose name I don't have, I apologize for that, but basically said, listen, we understand that we have a drug problem in Mexico. We understand we have massive corruption. We understand what the cartels are doing. We suffer from their carnage and their murdering sprees here in our own country. But do you not understand that it is America who made the cartels? Do you not understand that it is America who funds the cartels and who has made them as powerful as they are? Well, the bottom line is he's 100% right. Again, it's our appetite for drugs that continues to supply them. Now, the irony in all of this is that we spend billions of dollars going after the cartels. We spend billions of dollars in trying to dismantle the very organizations that we created and that we continue to fund. Now, if that is not the dog chasing its tail, I'm not sure what is. In addition to the amount of money that we spend on enforcing the drug laws, in addition to the $50 billion that we spend on the drugs themselves, we also spend billions of dollars on the effects of the drugs, meaning hospitalizations, addictions, rehabilitation clinics, outpatient clinics, and unfortunately, funerals. Now, the drug cartels are as powerful and as deadly, if not more than they've ever been. And as I mentioned, they branched out into human smuggling now. And we're talking about human trafficking, we're talking about modern day slavery, and it is very lucrative to them. And it's led to the chaos that we're seeing on our borders right now. They are further penetrating the United States, and they're becoming even a greater threat every single day. Their goal is to ultimately control the distribution of drugs in our country, and they have put their people in place to do that very thing. They've committed murders in the United States and atrocities, and that corruption that they had in Mexico is slowly bringing itself across the border into the United States. So I agree with Governor DeSantis, and I agree with all other politicians that they in fact are a national security threat. But as I mentioned, I was going to get back to Governor DeSantis, and I'm going to do that right now because I was disappointed that he didn't really mention the real problem. Now, I'm not picking on Governor DeSantis because there are other politicians that are in this same boat where they talk about disrupting these cartels and what they're going to do against the cartels, and they're going to sanction Mexico, and they're going to put pressure on the Mexican government and so forth. But we can't look to Mexico to solve our problem because this is an internal problem. Because again, we're funding these people, we're funding these cartels. And we've been doing this for decades and decades and decades, and we've been paying and paying and paying. Now, again, I mentioned the amount of money that we've paid in the effects of the drugs with the addictions and so forth. But there's another cost that's even more personal to all of us, and that is the effects of the drugs on us as people, as Americans, as parents, as brothers and sisters. There's nothing more crushing to your heart to see a parent have to bury their child because they died of a fentanyl overdose, or a family suffering because one of their family members is addicted, and they go through absolute hell, trying to get them cured of this addiction. So the personal costs that we pay are just tremendous. So how are we going to deal with this? Obviously, enforcement hasn't worked. We've tried that for decades, and I've been part of that as a police detective. I've worked over the years with the Drug Enforcement Administration, trying to do my part in this so-called drug war that we have. And it just hasn't worked. We would get together and basically talk about the futility of this. It's like counting grains of sand on the beach, putting your finger in the dike. It just doesn't work, because no matter how many Pablo Escobars we take out, how many cartels we disrupt, or how many huge loads of drugs that we confiscate, There is going to be people behind them. They're going to keep moving up the chain. And no matter how many we arrest, the drug business is going to continue on because there's a huge demand for it. And we've seen that. We've taken out one of the most powerful drug dealers in history, Pablo Escobar. Did that stop the drug trade? No, it didn't. It may have slowed it for a little bit, but it reorganized and came back in an even more powerful way. We've done the same with El Chapo, who's one of the kingpins, and he's in prison, but the drug trade is still continuing. And again, it branched out into human smuggling. So enforcement alone hasn't worked. And again, we've given it our best, including our lives. There have been many police officers and detectives and federal agents that have been gunned down in the fight against drugs and the cartels. One case that comes to mind, it's a little personal to me, is the case of DEA agent Kiki Camarena, who was stationed in Mexico and who was kidnapped by the cartels and brutally tortured and then murdered in the fight against drugs. So we've paid a lot, and we're continuing to pay to this very day. So if the enforcement side hasn't worked yet, we need to change our strategies, because that alone will not work. Now, what we need to do is to look at the demand side of this, okay, or the customer side of this equation. Because the drug business is like any other business. It relies on paying customers. And if you disrupt the paying customers, you'll disrupt the business. We need to concentrate on that. Just take a look at huge private corporations in the United States that have existed for years and years worth billions of dollars, and they disappeared. Why? Because they lost their customer base. The same thing can happen with the drug business. In order for that to happen, though, we need to have a national, in-your-face, as graphic as it needs to be, bold campaign targeted at our young people so that they don't become the customers of the drug dealers tomorrow. Now, I'm aware that we've got programs in place right now. There are a lot of state and local resources and outpatient clinics and programs within our schools to talk about the dangers of drugs. And I recall Nancy Reagan's Just Say No program, and then they've had commercials they put out on television where they would show an egg frying in a pan, and that would simulate your brain on drugs. Well, they may have been well-intended, but they were not powerful, they were not bold enough. And powerful messaging does work. It absolutely does work. Just take a look at what the big techs do. They just give it to us every single day with this powerful messaging, and it does affect our lives, what we see and what we hear. And so we need to adopt that same strategy and use powerful messaging to target our young people with this bold national campaign. Now, it seems to me that in schools we've been distracted because we've been talking more about CRT and whether or not it's appropriate to have drag shows come into elementary schools. Now, those are conversations for another debate, but it seems to me we've been distracted. We need to focus our energies on this national, robust, graphic campaign to show the kids the horrors of drugs with the goal of preventing them to turn to drugs, with the goal of preventing them from using drugs in the future. Now, some people may argue, well, our children can't be exposed to this type of graphic campaign showing these horrors of the drug lifestyle and what drugs does to us and the security threat it poses to the United States. I say absolutely they can, because I believe that the internet and what they see on the nightly news has given them enough protection and enough armor that they can handle this. But the campaign, again, needs to be bold, and we can do it. There are people in this country that have that skill. Just take a look again, as I mentioned, what big tech does to us and the propaganda machine, what that does to us. We can use those skill sets and we can use that type of messaging to target our young children. We know how to do it. Take a look at Madison Avenue in New York, which is the hub of marketing and messaging. They've been doing it for years. They have it down to a science. And we can employ the very best people in our country to combat this drug addiction or this drug appetite that we seem to have in this country that are just making the cartels even more powerful. So without that, I fear that we just will never actually defeat this, and we will wind up continuing to have to deal with this threat on a larger and larger scale as the cartels further penetrate the United States. I think this is essential because we need to target these young people before they get exposed to drugs and turn them away from that, turn them away from becoming the customers of the cartels. And that's what the cartels will fear, losing their customer base. Because again, the drug business is like every other business. We need to disrupt that side. Now, I'm not suggesting for a moment that we don't continue our enforcement efforts. Absolutely. We need to break the backs of the cartels. We need to disrupt their money flow, and we need to put them out of business. So we need to do that on this hand. And on the other hand, we need that national, robust, in-your-face, graphic as it needs to be, national campaign directed at our young children. It needs to be bold, and we need to use the best people in the country because, again, we know how to do this. Because I'm afraid if we don't, then our children will indeed become the Mexican drug cartel's future customers. I'd like to hear your comments. I'd like to hear your thoughts, so make sure that you leave them below. And also, if you like the show, hit the like button and hit the subscribe button, and make sure you hit the link below to get a copy of my book, The Gray Bird of Baghdad. I'm Steve Montero, and thank you for listening.